Good morning and welcome back. I'm Jeff and you're joining me on my journey to LS swap my 1972 C-10. Today's episode is episode 6 and we cover installing the new engine and transmission into the truck, as well as some fine details about the computer system, the Holley Terminator X Max that went in there. I also put in decoded digital gauges, and we'll also see the very first start of the truck. I also got some really cool footage in here like this, and you'll be able to see more of some drive-by footage that my 14-year-old Davis took with his drone. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Later on in the series, I might have one more video specifically related to this build, where I have more walk-around footage, more detailed explanation of what went on and certain things. So if there's things that you'd like to see that I didn't cover in detail in the video, let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to include that in those upcoming videos as well, about how to do certain things and technical stuff like that. So enjoy this video, and thanks for sticking around. Bye for now. A little bit of update time on the truck. The engine is in. The transmission crossmember is in. It needs to be bolted to the frame, but it is in. It looks beautiful. Let's see if I can get under here real quick. Okay, let's take a look at the crossmember. Already bolted it to the transmission just to get it where it needs to go. Now it sits on a flat spot on the transmission, on the frame, so I'm in a spot where I can drill through the frame and mount it appropriately so it's in there good. Right now what I just did was I mocked up how the radiator is going to sit in here, and it's got the dual fan kit on there, dual electric fan. I love that feature, and I'll be able to wire that into the Holley system. Also, what I got to do here is I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my transmission cooling lines. I think I'm going to use the factory lines that run underneath the engine, next to the oil pan, and come up to the front. And then the ECP radiator actually has a transmission cooler built in with an input and output for the fluid lines to flow through. So I'll just utilize those, but I need to figure out some sort of threaded connector that can adapt to the factory connector. Alright, so now it's time to mount the computer and to figure out a solution for this gaping hole in the firewall after I move the heater box. I didn't want to spend a lot of money on buying a patch panel that would cover this, so I decided to fabricate my own. I bought some cheap steel, just the stuff right here, and as you can see I already started cutting out a nice piece of it, and this is what I came up with. As you can see, I've already cut it out. I've drilled the holes that'll fit the mounting holes from where the heater box came out, and I've also got 4 holes in here to where the Holley Terminator X will be bolted to. So what I'm going to do right now is, after this dries a little bit, I'm going to bolt the Holley Terminator to it, show you guys what that looks like. Then I'm going to bolt it to the firewall and see if it kind of solves my problem. This is the panel I just made that goes inside the firewall that covers up the heater box. and I've mounted the Holley Terminator X to it with 4 bolts and nuts, and I'm going to tighten those down and get this installed inside the cab and see what it looks like from there. Here it is from the outside. It's all bolted up from the inside of the firewall. I just put a little paint on it real quick. There's the hole where the wiring harness is going to go through, and again, I'm not too concerned with how big that is. I'm going to put some weather stripping around it so it protects the wiring, but there's going to be lots of other holes through here that are going to let air in, so I'm not too concerned about that. Let's go on the inside and see what the Terminator looks like from the inside here. Hopefully this shows up on camera. Okay, so there's the new plate, the new panel that has the Terminator Max bolted up to it. Wiring harness is going to come through here. I'll loop any excess wiring inside the cab and pin it up here somewhere nice and neat out of the way. I've got 3 bolts holding this in, actually 2 screws, 1 bolt, 2 of the factory screws, one right there and one up there, and then I've got another little bolt down here in the middle because these 2 were stripped out, and one of them was stripped out and one of them was rusted out, so I had to improvise and put one through the little cross bracing there. And I'm going to walk you through some of the issues and things that I had when installing the Holley Terminator X Max controller with wiring harness for my setup. Again, this is a Gen 4 5.3 liter 58X reluctor wheel, flex fuel injectors, drive-by-wire throttle body. So here's the things I learned along the way that weren't readily available explicit information that I knew of. The first issue I ran into was the cam sensor. Now, the cam sensor on these Gen 4 motors is located in the front of the engine cover, the timing cover, right down here at the bottom. Hopefully there's enough light to see that. There's a sub harness that runs from the sensor right here in the middle down to the bottom, and the factory harness plugs into the bottom. Well, you're not going to use that sub harness, and I didn't know that when I had the engine already assembled and in the truck, and I was expecting to plug it in right down there. Instead, you plug directly into the sensor itself using the harness. Now, this trunk of the harness right here that contains a lot of things. It contains the intake air temperature sensor. It also contains a lot of sensors here, or wires that go to sensors that you're not going to use, unless you have things like a fuel pressure regulator, things like that that you need to plug into, like a Holley adapted type setup. You'll have your water temperature harness that plugs in here, and then another branch of this harness that I have tied up in here, you can see goes behind the power steering pump and then goes over behind the water pump down to the sensor, the cam sensor. So that was kind of hard to wire in, kind of hard to reach. I recommend doing that without the accessories on the engine, and go ahead to make it look clean. Go ahead and remove that sub harness that is used for that. The second issue I ran into was that this is a speed density type tune that comes in these Holley systems, so you don't need your mass airflow sensor, but you do need a way to plug in your intake air temperature sensor. There's a lot of guys out there that do it different ways. You can tap into your intake manifold somewhere, find a spot that you can tap into and plug one in there. The way I did it was I plugged it into the elbow that goes into the intake. I think it's going to work, but we'll find out after I do some tuning to it and see if it holds pressure enough. I've got on the inside of this thing a grommet that holds everything on, and it's in there really tight, so I think I'm pretty happy with the way it's set up, but we'll see. The other thing I learned was this sensor doesn't, no matter what sensor I plugged it into, I cannot get this safety plug, this safety pin down on my sensor, and I know it's all the way seated, just can't get it on there, so I don't know what the deal is there. And let's see, what else did I run into in terms of wiring up here? Nothing much more up here. If I think of anything else, or if you guys have questions along the way when you're doing your install, let me know, and I can go over what I've learned from this. I did learn this as well in terms of map sensors. The way that the Holley Terminator X is set up to use, if you're not using boost and you don't need a 2-bar, 2.5-bar, 3-bar map sensor, the basic setup that you can do with your handheld will allow you to use the 1-bar map sensor that's built into the computer. You just need to run a vacuum line from the computer, and there's a little blow hose that hangs off of there, and then you need to tap that into the intake manifold somewhere. You can use any of these little ports here and find a little spot. I think you can actually twist these little guys off here and plug it right in there and use it that way. I opted to plug in the map sensor harness to my map sensor, my factory map sensor, and once I get my computer dongle cable, whatever you call it, that hooks up to the CAN bus, then I can use the software and I can actually program in the parameters for this map sensor and use the sensor the way it's already set up to be used without using that little blue hose. Let's see, what else did I have to come across here? Yeah, in terms of PCV and relieving positive crankcase, ventilation pressure, things like that, on the driver side of the motor, I'm using the factory style PCV valve off the rear of the valve cover, and you can see that there. PCV hose comes up here and goes into the top of the intake manifold. I know that's not ideal, but I figure, hey, I've been running this engine for over 225,000 miles. When I pulled the intake off, when I pulled the heads off, it wasn't that dirty over 225,000 miles, so I'm not worried about excessive oil consumption or oil gumming up the valves, things like that. I figure there's enough fuel going through there, it's going to clean it out, so I didn't get a catch can or anything like that. On the passenger side, however, if you know, on your factory setup, this input side of the hose down here behind the oil fill cap, that usually goes into the intake manifold. Well, I wasn't thinking and I didn't know what to do with that. I could have done what I did on my old truck and just put like a little breather cap on there, or even cap it off and use one of those little breather cap oil caps. But I decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take a chance. I'm going to tap into my eBay or Amazon $58 intake kit and just drill a hole into it, get a grommet that goes around that hole, and put the connector, the factory style connector, into there. And it's pretty tight. There's a little bit of air leak that'll come through there just like it does on the factory, so I figure that's going to be okay as well. So those are the things I did to the engine that I wasn't expecting to have to do, and hopefully everything works out fine. I think it will.